AMD's mid-range king versus the Intel Arc 770. I'm changing things up a little bit today. I'm always hyper focused on this AMD versus Nvidia just battle that's been going on since the dawn of enthusiast PC gaming. But I've heard more and more and more just, hey, Intel's getting better drivers. Drivers are getting faster. We're getting improvements on all DirectX 11 games. We've now implemented this title. So I finally felt like the time there was enough feedback that potentially now's the time to try an Intel card. And I've already got some initial impressions that we're going to go over, and then ultimately only time will tell. But let's dig into it a little bit. So today we're going to be looking at the 6750 XT from AMD. It's their last gen mid-range card versus the Arc 770. And both these cards came out in 2022, which is at this point going on well, they're over 2 years old at this point. So it might kind of wonder, why are we still talking about these cards? Well, 6750 XT is available right now for 309. It's got 12 gigs of VRAM, and it's still a great card for either 1080 or 1440p, which at its price point is destroying the competition even from AMD itself. At 300 bucks, you are much better off buying the 6700 or 6750 XT than you are getting a 7600 or 7600 XT. 7600 only 8 gigs and it's slower. Don't fall for the 16 gigs on the XT. It's still going to be a slower card. And then the other thing that makes this a perfect time is just let's visit how Intel's progression has gone. This card came out, I believe, October of 22, so it hasn't been a full 2 years yet. Initially came out with some great looking hardware, and I think we all know it was just plagued from the get-go with driver troubles. It's hard to get a brand new product off the ground this day and age, this late in the game, and try to provide uniform support against among all titles. It's a huge undertaking to have. So props to Intel, and hopefully we're going to see, how far they've come. And the two cards that I'm going to be looking at, I've got the MSI Mech uh, Gaming, or whatever they call it, with the two fans for the 6750, and I've got the Sparkle for the A770. I always cover it, not my huge thing, but build quality because people like to hear about it. The MSI Mech, MSI's entry level cards, they all kind of have this, generic silver outlining look. It's a fine card. It's all plastic. It's got the nickel or whatever heat pipes. Pretty standard. Nothing to write home about. The Sparkle A770, it is plastic as well, but it's much denser plastic. It's got that LED liner, says Sparkle right on there. And if you're doing a more generic Intel build, it absolutely looks great in your case. I'd say they definitely killed it on the build quality. And then price wise, these prices fluctuate so much. I think for that 6750, I've been sitting on it a little while. I think I paid about 329 or 339 for it. I just checked PC Part Picker. You can pick up the XFX version for 309. That's definitely a killer deal. And then for the A770, I picked it up when it was on sale for 289, and I went back through and I validated. It's dropped down to about 289 several times, but usually sits about 330. So at best, the A770 is a little bit cheaper on sale. I've never seen a 67 or 6750 go below 299. So at best, it's a little bit cheaper, and at worst, they're the same exact price. And then for the drivers, that's really my main test. I've never used an Intel graphics card before. And so this is my first one. I was like, I'm going to come out of the gate hard. I'm getting their top model. It's not that expensive for being Intel's flagship. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. And worst case scenario, if it's absolutely terrible, I'll just use it as an AV1 encoder. And I've heard great things about that, which I haven't gotten to test that yet. But like I said, worst case scenario, that's all it's going to be for me. I'm not going to game on it. I'm just going to use it to encode things. So right out of the gate, 6750, I test all my games, I run my benchmarks, everything's going good, system stable, great, 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 halfway done, making my content, pull that thing out of there, load in the Intel, like I said, looks amazing. Restart the computer, everything looks great, go into the safe boot, do the DDU, remove all that stuff, reboot it, install the Intel drivers, and this happens.
You can't make this up. I wanted to believe that all driver problems were in the past, but it froze on the install of the driver. What are you doing, Intel?
Now you can't make this up. When I'm, testing a card for the first time to say, hey, have they fixed their drivers? Immediately a completely stable computer locks up for the first time and freezes during the driver install. I went ahead and restarted the computer, and this is where I made my mistake. I just went right back into running the drivers install, and it appeared like it went back through and properly installed everything. And I started getting into the benchmarks, and I was just every other game I was getting a blue screen, and I was thinking to myself, what in the world has happened? And just to cover all my bases, I went ahead, went back into safe mode, did the DDU again, and then reinstalled completely fresh, which now in hindsight was pretty obvious. I shouldn't have gone with the corrupted first install and just overridden it. And then from there, it was smooth sailing. So that was probably my fault. I mean, it should have never frozen in the first place, but it is what it is. I just thought that was funny because I was thinking to myself, I really hope these drivers have gotten to where they need to be. And the first thing that happened is the software suite freezes and corrupts the install. But for today, we're going to go through and I tested kind of a variety of games, ranging from newer titles to slightly older titles, because that's where Intel's struggled a little bit. And we've done 1080p and 1440p. I don't think anybody should be trying to use these for 4K. In my test rig, I didn't run it in my 7800X3D PC. I've gone ahead, I threw some other parts I had laying around together to kind of make a test rig. So it's going to be a 12900K in a MSI Z690 board and 64 gigs of DDR4, not 5. So that could have a small impact, but both cards were kept the same. And that was 3600, and then got a 850 watt power supply, which is more than enough for either one of these cards. And with that, let's get into taking a look side by side how these cards placed.
Agent Anderson has her methods, Deputy. Her results speak for themselves. You will learn to trust it. I certainly have. And speak. Welcome back, Anderson. The trees.
You're the one who wanted to switch.
I think I hear someone.
I'm not walking all the way back
Could
down.
be our deputy.
Hey, over here. Hey there. Agent Casey, right? Sheriff Breaker said you'd...
Innocents perish with every wasted second. We must act. Target area marked. You're cleared hot. On your six. Target area marked. You're cleared hot.
Estaré aquí toda la noche.
¡Hey! ¡Cuidado, niños!
Right off the rip, testing 1080p. We came out of the gate with my test suite here of games, and I immediately was just thinking, this is not looking good. This is not looking good at all. Intel, you've had a year to fix this thing, over a year to fix this thing, and this is what we have to show for it. This is terrible. Why are people saying it's better? Yeah, maybe if you got 20% better than crap, you just got 20% more crap. And I know there's some diehards that just want Intel to succeed, and I want Intel to succeed because we need more competition. Nvidia's doing a runaway game with their stupid 90s series, which should be a Titan card, and nobody should care about it. But now everybody's buying it because it's not a Titan, it's the top tier, and the 4080's trash, and the 3080's trash, and they're all trash now. So we need some competition to shake this market up. And as a first gen, honestly, I'm hating on Intel. It's not that bad. Just if you're trying to put together a budget PC, sometimes when they're on sale, they might look appetizing, but you're leaving quite a bit on the table. So as much as I want them to succeed, And I think they're smart. They updated their drivers for DaVinci and some other, production software suites. So maybe they can get some sales by getting into a niche like that. Like, hey, we're the budget AV1 encoder, we're the budget whatever. But right now for gaming, I know they've been doing hard work. I've been watching them closely, and I've seen all sorts of interviews, and they're working around the clock. So I don't want to hate on them too bad. But when you come down here and start looking at the titles, Tomb Raider, that was kind of my older title select. The Intel's getting lower than the AMD's 1% lows. And that's what we got here. So red obviously is AMD, blue's Intel, and the darker is going to be your average, lighter is going to be your 1% lows. You come down, Talos Principle, I think that's a Unreal Engine 5 game, wanted to include it in there. I think I got a couple of those. They're pretty hard to run, but I just wanted to show, hey, even last gen cards can run these pretty good. 6750 coming in, 71 on average. Definitely a playable, great experience. You always want to be pushing over that 60, and then there you go. The Intel coming in at 43, well below, almost half as much. That's not good. And then you come down the thing, it's just more and more of the same. Modern Warfare, AMD absolutely destroys NVIDIA in that game too, usually class for class. So I know that's a heavily AMD biased game. I included that though because I wanted to see like, hey, is it just NVIDIA? No, it's not just NVIDIA. It's Intel too. They get destroyed by AMD. And then Helldivers, it's my favorite game that's come out recently. I'm playing it with boys all the time. And so obviously, like #1 game on Steam, I think, still. So got to put that in the test so people can see how these cards are going to perform. And then Cyberpunk and Alan Wake, I primarily included those because they're the two hardest games to ray trace in. And I already know how NVIDIA performs on ray tracing, and I already know how AMD performs. So I wanted to see firsthand. I'd heard rumors that Intel was a little bit better. So I ran those games without ray tracing just to have the numbers on the board. But ultimately, those two titles were just selected for being like, hey, how much punishment can this Intel card take? So overall, 1080p, not very good for the Intel. But what gets more interesting is as we go along to 1440p, don't get me wrong, the Intel still loses, but it closes the gap significantly. And the second I started testing 1440p, I almost thought to myself, like, ooh, are we having a comeback story? And it's crazy because the Intel card, the A770, has some really solid hardware. It's got the 16 gigs, and unlike AMD and NVIDIA that have their 16 gigs on 128-bit bus, Intel's giving you the full 256. So, like, they got plenty of bandwidth there, and it's got some power, but it's almost like it just doesn't know how to use it because for Intel, I just absolutely could not recommend it for a 1080p rig. It doesn't have, I don't know, the base speed to just push it or something. I don't know. I'd have to do some more digging. But then 1440, you crank the resolution up, and it doesn't really lose nearly as much performance. So the AMD numbers start coming down, but the Intel, they come down as well, but just not as much. So the race got a little bit closer once we increased the resolution of the game. So it's definitely a better 1440p performer. The problem is already, if you start looking at some of these newer titles, even though it loses less performance when increasing the resolution, the performance still isn't amazing. I mean, for a $289 card, honestly, actually, it is pretty good. I'd be interested to see, how this would stack up versus like the 7600 XT or something like that, because they're a little bit closer. XT is actually more expensive. So yeah, that would be an interesting test. I might try to do that at some point. But I mean, Intel is doing respectable at some of these titles. Tomb Raider, obviously that's relatively older. It's pretty much just used for its benchmark at this point. 87 on average, cool. You start coming down, Returnal, actually they tightened it way up. At this point, Intel's only losing by about 3 FPS. That's not looking bad. And then you come down to Helldivers, starting to get all right, and you're still doing over 60 FPS, so that's looking good. But across the board, the 6750 is just going to wipe the floor with this thing for gaming and for value, if that's all you're looking at. Until you turn on that ray tracing. So I had heard the rumors, but when I saw that baseline performance, I thought, there's no way. Because even NVIDIA, you turn on ray tracing, it takes a hit, just not as much of a hit. So you can get into that, fallacy where people say, like, hey, if you want to do ray tracing, you got to have an NVIDIA card. But the NVIDIA card's so expensive that people buy a tier down. And it's like, dude, if you're buying a 4060 instead of, like a 7900 GRE because you want to ray trace, it's like the base performance of the GRE is so much higher that even though it's going to take a larger ray tracing hit, I don't know who would win. I'm assuming the 7900 GRE, just because that's my hypothesis here, is that the performance is, I haven't tested either one of those cards, but the performance is so much higher to begin with that even if it takes a larger hit, it still won't lose, even though the other card's taking a smaller hit, because it just started from so far in the back. And that's what I expected to see here when I ran those baseline numbers, and boy, did Intel flip the switch. So let me explain this a little bit, what I did here. For Cyberpunk, I did not do the path tracing because I knew Alan Wake was going to have the path tracing. So I was like, Cyberpunk's one of the hardest games to do ray tracing in, but I'm not going to take it to path trace. I'm just going to take it to that, like, Psycho or Overdrive or whatever they call it, which is doing a lot, but not quite path tracing. And then Alan Wake, we got the path tracing on, and then I knew that with path tracing, neither of these cards were going to be very successful. So this is not a way I'd recommend playing the game, but I ran it at 1080p with an FSR quality on for both of them. But as you can see here, in the raster performance, AMD won across the board, and now you go into ray tracing, and even from that huge lead that AMD had in this scenario, Intel still beat them across the board. Now, none of these are really playable. Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080, Intel's average is at 32. Technically, you could have kind of a console experience if you wanted to on that card, but props to Intel. To me, this is promising because, NVIDIA's really pushing this technology. AMD's trying to play catch up, and Intel's already showing that they can do it. So if they can just work out the rest of the stuff on their card, I'll be pretty excited to see. I don't really know if their next generation's going to be super impressive, but if they can stay in the game, I bet their third generation will be. And I think the difference is AMD is just continually playing catch up, and it seems like they never actually catch up. Intel is already showing here that they have the basis to really perform at some of these at ray tracing, and they're already getting, they got XeSS already out the gate, and they're starting to get that implemented in games, and they're already pushing out all this stuff that AMD just took years to put out behind NVIDIA. So Intel's coming late to the game, but they're coming out hard. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So like I said, I'll continue to watch them. I'll be interested to see, what their next generation does, but I think it'll be even better to see their third generation, which unfortunately is probably like, 5 years away or something. And so much could change between now and then. And maybe they'll prove me wrong. Maybe they'll just take what they learned and their second gen will just absolutely smash. But that's that. So for Intel, I see a lot of stuff, and I think it's, people are excited. They want them to succeed. They want them to do well. They want more competition, which makes better products. And I'm 100% there. I do as well. But I just couldn't, in good conscience, tell anyone, unless you're, somebody who's got, they just do this for fun, and they maybe got a couple computers and they want to try it out and dabble a little. If you're trying to build, your one and only rig, and you're like, hey, I'm trying to put something budget together, I think about, $300 dollars or so is about my max budget for a GPU. I just absolutely would not buy this card at this point. Across the board, just the AMD wins. And I've actually got the tabular numbers just to point this out, because sometimes I think I actually it makes more sense when I look at it this way. So just like kind of we were describing at 1080p, the 6750 is basically 40% faster than the Intel. And the 1% lows is almost 60% faster. And then you come down here to 1440p, Intel makes this big comeback, and it's only 25% slower, or the AMD is 25%, almost 26% faster, lows are 18% faster. But here's the thing that seems great to say, like, oh, good, well, it's a better performer at 1440p, it starts making a comeback. No, it's still losing, because as you can see across these titles, the 6750, this isn't a huge grouping of titles, but at least the 6750 is still averaging out to about 67 frames across all the titles. And, some of those are a little bit lower, and really it's going to depend on what you like to play. So the AMD or the Intel, great. You're starting to climb back from the bottom, but you're still providing less than 60 FPS on average. So if games are going to be giving you less than 60 FPS, then you're probably going to want to lower the resolution. And you lower the resolution, it doesn't do as well. I didn't have a lot of time. I just got these cards in, and I wanted to put something together. I was really excited to test it out. So I haven't done like a ton of testing with the XeSS on the Intel card. I've tried it out on some of the AMD cards just because I heard it had better visuals than the FSR. I haven't even tested that a ton, but I have turned it on a couple of times. So I'd be interested, because on the AMD cards, it doesn't seem like that technology helps as much as the other upscalers do. But I'd be interested to see how it works on the Intel, because, maybe if you're at 1440 and then you're using the upscaler, it'd be interesting to see how the performance works out. But my bottom line is even though it's catching up at the higher resolution, it's still not the card I would necessarily want to be my 1440p card. I would be much happier in this budget at doing the AMD card, which is my stance for budget builds. I think everybody should be shooting for 1440p, because to me that makes the step from 1080 to 1440 is a large one. I think going to 4K is not worth it unless you're just truly an enthusiast. So the 1440p is the sweet spot, and the only thing around $300 is going to be that 6750 XT, something like that. So that's going to be my, most people, even for about 1,000 or even a little under 1,000, depending on your priorities, can get that 1440p 60 FPS experience on a PC, and I think that's really where the value's at. So if you're looking at this, the A770 just doesn't really fit the bill. And then when you go down to actually do the numbers on it, on the ray tracing, so you're looking at a card that's starting, 25% slower, and then it makes this comeback to be about 20% faster. It's a massive swing, because you see there, the 6750 is only 79% as fast as the A770 on average, doing ray tracing just between those two titles. And I did those because they were the hardest ones, and I want to see what the Intel could do. If you go into lighter ray tracing games, AMD's fine at them, and then that gap would narrow there. But I just wanted to see, if I put this thing under the absolute stress, what would happen. And then the prices at the bottom, those are what I personally paid for these cards. So what I'm showing there is the 6750 is only 17% more expensive, but it's 25 to 40% faster, considering that you're probably just not going to use ray tracing on either one of them. That was an interesting experience, but let's be honest, we're not going to turn it on and play at 20 FPS. We're just not going to want to do that. So that already supports it, because I paid 17% more, but I got 25 to 40% performance depending on resolution and different things like that. But then what even hurts the Intel even more is, like right now today, I could just hop on Amazon and buy that card for $309, and now there's only a $20 difference, which would shrink that price margin to be very small. So that's where I'm at this point. I just wanted to get on the hype, see if they really fixed it, see how it's going. And I'm not dogging on Intel. I think they have done really good work, and I think it's tough. They're having to go, title by title, engine by engine. They're having to do these optimizations, get it figured out. And a lot of that work will carry forward into the future, so they don't have to continually go back and redo it. But like I said, unless you just kind of want to toy around with this as an experiment or something, if you're looking for your one and done build, I would not do the Intel. The only thing it really has as a pro is it's got AV1 encoding. And if this is your one and done video card and you're going to play and record and do different things on it, I probably still wouldn't get the Intel. I'd just look at, a 7700 XT or 7800 XT, and I would tighten my budget on other parts in order to make that fit, is what I would do. But what I'm going to do with this thing is I'm just going to throw it in my extra computer to be my recording box, and I'm going to see how it does there, because I've heard that the quality of the recording on the Intel is pretty high. And I will say that my AMD cards they encode very fast, but I'm not really liking the quality. So we'll see how the Intel does, and that's what we'll do with it. Because to me right now, it's just not really worth trying to game on. It's not a bad experience. It played everything I wanted to play, but I've just got other cards that I can use for that. So I'm gonna, because they do better.